Hello everyone, welcome to the Town Manager Download, a podcast about local government and the town of Shrewsbury. On today's podcast, we'll be joined by Christopher Roy, the General Manager of Selco, to discuss Selco and public power in the town of Shrewsbury. I'm Kevin Mizikar, Town Manager of the town of Shrewsbury, and as always, I'm joined by Taylor Galusha, Communications Coordinator. How's everything going, Taylor?
Nice long, not actually, it wasn't a long weekend, but it felt like a long weekend, normal weekend.
Yeah, it was good. Felt shorter because we were at Finance Committee hearings the prior weekend or a couple weekends before. So, it was great to have a normal weekend.
Nice weather.
Yep, weather's getting there. Can't complain about this week's weather for April. So, what else is going on?
I finished my public information officer basic training last week.
What was that all about? How did that go?
It was great. It was through MEMA with FEMA as well, and it was at the New England Regional Communications Education Center in Tewksbury. I definitely did not get the acronym correct for that location, but it's a new training location for the region for public information and whatnot. So
that's great. So you'll be taking on the role as public information officer for the town, and that's an emergency management based position. So what are some of the concepts that you all went through there?
We started at the basics up into training how to do like a press briefing on camera and interviews. But they like to emphasize that the function can be for planned events and also unplanned events. So if, for example, MEMA will have a public information officer working for the Boston Marathon. It's a planned mass gathering. So it's always good to be prepared for stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good, interesting role we look forward to hearing more about. Talking about your new role as communications coordinator and some of your near-term goals on a future episode. So what's up in the Shrew? What else is going on?
We have a lot going on as we get into our not the end of our busy season, but kind of the end of our super busy season. The assessor's office is taking applications for the Shrewsbury Tax Relief Fund. Those are due back May 15th. There's an online application you can print out and send back into the assessor's office.
That's the new program, right?
Yes, it's the Standing with Shrewsbury Tax Relief Committee. So that was established through last annual town meeting. The committee got appointed earlier this year, and now they actually have funds to distribute. So if people have questions, they can reach out to the assessor's office. I think their email is assessors@shrewsburyma.gov, and then their phone number is 508-841-8501.
Okay.
So they can answer any questions people have.
That's awesome.
We have the Arbor Day event that Selco is hosting. I believe that is April 29th, where they're going to be giving out free trees. They have 750 trees to give out, and a bunch of different town organizations are going to be participating at it. They're hosting it at Dean Park this year from 9 to 12.
Great.
So that's super exciting. So many things.
Yeah, so we have updated town hall hours with really two purposes behind it. So the changes in hours are much like we had last summer. So Tuesday evenings, the building, town hall will be open until 6:30 for municipal staff. And then on Fridays, it will close at noon for municipal operations. So the two drivers behind that is one, trying to provide additional customer service hours outside of normal business hours. So those who need to access business at the town hall but work a traditional business schedule have that opportunity to come in, and we saw a lot of individuals take advantage of that last summer, so we'll continue that. And then it is obviously a benefit to employees, so although they're continue to work the same number of hours on a weekly basis, it does get them out of the building for the most part at noon on Friday, which is an incentive. We're always trying to find ways to be competitive in the marketplace, and of course, many employers have the opportunity to do full remote schedule and things like that, and we don't. So we thought this was a nice opportunity to explore with town employees, very similar to what other municipalities do as well. So we're not, blazing the trail on this one. And today, changing topics, is the first day of spring yard waste collection at the curb. So that's an added feature this year. We're expanding curbside collections throughout the year, and residents were mailed a postcard with a calendar. So we'll be doing at least one pickup per month between now and the fall. And as we get into the heavier fall season, there will be multiple weeks that we pick up throughout the month. So everyone should take advantage of that and take a look at the new schedule. We hope it's a benefit. We hope it benefits everyone like we think it will be. And we have a new hauler that's doing that, Casella. So it's a separate contract from our regular solid waste and recycling collection at the curb. So those are a couple customer service enhancements that we're looking at. As we move towards town meeting in May, May 15th it will start. We're finalizing everything with the Finance Committee over the next few Thursdays, so there'll be public hearings associated with the warrant, and we'll be no doubt spending 5 or 6 hours with the committee going through everything. There's 54 warrant articles, and it'll take a lot to get through that and receive public comment, which we're looking forward to.
It's our first batch of CPC articles as well, so there'll be a bunch of, I think, 10 projects.
Yeah, there's 10. Well, there's 10 total articles. One of them's the administrative funding article, but nine projects that are seeking funding with the approval of town meeting that have the recommendation of the CPC.
And some involvement items that are on the horizon. The transportation multimodal study for the town center. They have launched a survey that can be found online. I think it's shrewsburyma.gov/multimodal. And then the climate action plan survey for the community will be coming out in the next few weeks. So I think by the time this episode launches, that community survey will be out. So
that's all in Shrewsbury?
Yes, on shrewsbury.com. I think it's Shrewsbury, the internal link is shrewsburyma.gov/all-in-Shrewsbury.
Okay,
so
that's the best way to get there, is through the town website.
Yep.
Great.
Lots of exciting things.
Yeah. So we've talked a number of times on the Town Manager Download about some of the unique features of municipal government in New England, and certainly there's public power entities that are outside of New England, but as far as Massachusetts goes, we're one of 41 municipalities that have our own public power entity, and that's Shrewsbury Electric, Light and Cable, so Selco. And we're pleased today to have Chris Roy, who's been the general manager of Selco since July of 2020, join us on the Town Manager Download. So we'll take this opportunity to welcome Chris in onto the set. All right, Chris, welcome to the set. We're so happy to have you here to talk about public power and Selco and how you serve the residents of Shrewsbury. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to come and sit with Taylor and I. Let's take it from the top. So tell us about your experience and history and path into the local government, public power, and how that happened. And
yeah, sure. I mean, in short, like I'd say many college-age kids today, I was in search of a job after mounting college debt. And I had picked an engineering path, and as luck would have it, I went to the Career Resources Group and said, well, I'm not really interested in, the laboratory work. I had gone down that path a little, but as luck would have it, the neighbor happened, the neighbor of the Career Resources woman happened to be affiliated with the local utility. And so she said, well, I'll talk to my neighbor when he's out raking leaves and hand him your resume. And the connection was made, and from there I went through the interview process and secured my first job right out of school. And that was what is now Eversource. And so I started my career there through their leadership training group, and then made the jump to Public Power about 4 years after that.
Okay. So what do you have a degree in, Chris? What?
I have a bachelor's in electrical engineering and a master's in power systems management.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Great. So you started in the private side of things with Eversource, and where was your first municipal job?
So, yep, that was the jump from Eversource to Concord
Okay.
Municipal Light Plant, and that was an interesting transition, going from how the private sector utilities are run to the municipal sector, and I haven't looked back ever since.
So you've been in public power since Concord.
Since Concord.
And I know you also served the city, is it City of Belmont? Town of Belmont?
It is town.
Town of Belmont?
Yep.
So you've been with 3 public power, and I had mentioned previously that there's 41 municipalities that have public power departments or public power within their communities. How do you explain the biggest difference between a public power entity like Selco and investor-owned utilities? You taught me that term, investor-owned
Sure.
utility there, Eversource or National Grid. So what's the biggest difference?
The biggest difference is often derived in the title there. Investor-owned highlights who owns National Grid and Eversource. So basically all policies, all business direction is geared towards the investors
Okay.
of the privately owned utilities. Whereas in the municipal light plant model, the public power model, the owners are the local communities. So therefore, every decision made is for the value and benefit of the community as the owner versus the investor who is looking to earn a return on that investment.
Interesting. So you've been with Selco since July of 2020, and Selco obviously has a long and storied history well before that. So how long's Selco been in place, and how's it evolved over that time, and how it serves the community?
Sure. Well, I guess I would be remiss not to highlight the fact that our website does have a really nice history going back to the centennial of 2008. So I will pull some of my factoids from that document. But it matches what I've learned along the way. And so to quickly touch on the origins, it was the 1890, 1891 timeframe where public power as an entity came into being, where in that time it was a lot simpler than today, and it was focused on street lighting. And so the roots of that were the private streetlight providers, and really the inaugural expansion of electricity to many areas. They were finding it difficult, and many communities weren't feeling they were being appropriately served. So in the 1890s, they opened the door to municipally owned systems. And from there you saw, as you mentioned, the 41 MLPs in Massachusetts. From there, you really started to see, more and more communities getting involved and taking control of their own utility operations. And so Shrewsbury in particular, 1908, they went through the municipal light plan adoption process, which remains the same today as it did over 100 years ago. And so 1908, Shrewsbury entered the mix and started delivering street lighting and building out the electric system.
Interesting. I don't think you were here in 1908, but we'll dig in a little bit on that. So, do you have any idea? It's very interesting to think about. So this concept of electricity, and it was bringing lights, street lighting into neighborhoods. When did electricity really start going into homes? So it's like you were saying the late 1800s. It was street lighting.
Yes.
By the time that Selco was created just 20 years or so later, I would assume that electrification was moving from the streetlights to the homes.
Yes, so that time frame also spurred expansion of electricity to the homes, also the transition of electricity being reserved for, quite frankly, the wealthy families
Okay.
that could afford to extend wires or generating plants to their homes, to being a public good that is an underpinning of economic development. And so, to your point, you're seeing that through 1908, then the 1910, and every community has their own variation of that. Just to quickly touch on a neighboring story to the north, there's also this other model. The New Hampshire Electric Cooperative was formed because, again, as the private utilities expanded, it also wasn't profitable to expand to more rural communities. And so you had these other models, whether it be municipalization or formation of cooperatives, to bring those lines to farming communities and other places where the density didn't make the business model look the same as a Worcester or a Boston or otherwise.
Interesting. So it took some time, but by the time Selco was being built, there was already roads or paths in to electrification of homes. That's great. So while we're on the history, I'll touch back on another conversation you and I, Chris. It's my understanding that municipal light departments used to sell electric appliances.
Yes.
I don't know that Selco ever has. It makes a lot of sense, but can you touch on that piece of history for MLPs?
Okay, so then fast forward a couple of decades from just getting electricity. Now it went into, well, electricity is the way to go. And so municipal light plants across the state started to either open storefronts for appliances. I believe Selco, we didn't necessarily have a storefront here, but we did have the lobby of the office. I have seen pictures that you could walk through the lobby and there would be electric appliances on your left and your right, and you could browse your options to see why you should make the investment into an electric appliance. And so that was a real boon for the industry. And again, not to oversimplify, but in many ways it was an effort to grow sales. And so the interesting thing, not to jump around in the historical timeline here, but then it went, over the subsequent decades, it went from electrify, storefronts, and all of this to energy efficiency. And now, for a different reason, we're into today's era where we're looking to then electrify again.
Sure.
And so that's a whole nother noteworthy topic.
There's a lot of similarities, and now, of course, Selco has evolved, I think, in at least into two really distinct and separate areas, one being cable in the 1980s,
Yes.
and then internet at some point, and maybe you know the time frame better than I do, but it's really interesting to think about how electricity came to be, and Selco has evolved ever since gaining a foothold in the area. But so talk about the cable and internet aspect of Selco's operations, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So staying in theme, so Selco has been the root of a lot of significant achievements in the industry. Just touching on two in the electric before going to the cable. One was a landmark lawsuit that one of the prior managers, Jim Breaker, brought to light, where before, essentially Shrewsbury had to buy power from National Grid and then distribute it there, whereas Selco initiated the lawsuit to say, well, we're a utility like a National Grid. We should be able to buy wholesale and then at obviously a lower cost and then distribute it more efficiently from there. So that was the first one. The second one was the formation of the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, which offers now buying that wholesale in bulk. So that was another significant economies of scale win for the model. And then after that was done, now we get into the cable world where, okay, we've done 2 major achievements. Now let's be the first municipally owned cable operator really in the region back in 1983.
Interesting. So were those U.S. Supreme Court cases?
Yes, those were all federal
Interesting.
federal cases.
Wow. So, so you had cable and Selco pretty much as long as cable has existed has been the only provider of cable TV service in Shrewsbury. And then any idea when Selco started offering internet? How that? I mean, obviously I know there was dial-up internet before there was, dedicated DSL and things like that, but I assume in the late 90s or early 2000s, we began providing those services.
Yes, so that was along that timeline. This is a really good test for my memory of history. I happen to be a fan. So yes, so then the cable TV side and delivery of TV signal evolved first to the internet and then to telephone. I believe telephone was 2006.
Okay.
So relatively speaking,
Sure.
compared to 1908,
Right.
a little more recent. And then in between, I believe it was 1990, maybe early 90s, was addition of the internet side of things. So again, it's just the continual layering of additional services to basically adapt to, again, the focus of, back to the root of the business model, right? It's the essence of what does the community need to thrive, we'll deliver that service. And so it's really a fascinating evolution of the municipal model on both the electric and the cable industries.
Speaking of business models, Chris, so what's the day-to-day, what's the operating model of Selco? So there's the Shrewsbury Light Commission, 5 commissioners that are appointed by the town manager, and you report to the Light Commission. How do you structure your organization beyond that point?
Sure. So we have set up our structure with, I have 5 direct reports.
Okay.
So as we talked about, we have 2 primary business units, being the electric and cable side. So right now we have it structured as one of the folks that directly reports to me is your director of the electric service side. Another is the director of the cable service side. And then we have 2 groups that span both business units. So that would be accounting, obviously the financial side spans both businesses. Same with customer service, marketing, communications, outreach, that type of thing. So that covers both. And then the third group that really is cross-functional is IT. So we have that kind of as a separate group to make sure our business systems can support all of our activities.
Interesting. And how many total employees does Selco have?
Currently 72.
Okay. Wow. That's great. So obviously a lot has changed over Selco's history, and I've had the experience of working in local government in a number of communities in Massachusetts, and Shrewsbury is the first community that I've worked in that's had a public power entity. So I see that as a huge advantage of being able to, garner economic development opportunities and business relationships and partnerships that are literally just down the hall at the town hall where Selco offices are. How do you see that relationship between the formal town and Selco, and how we can best take advantage of continuing to have a public power entity in Shrewsbury?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that's one of the key components to communicate in terms of the benefit to any community looking either that currently has this option or looking to explore this option is, in many cases, right, 41 out of 351.
Yep.
That's not a high percentage.
Right.
And so quite often it falls by the wayside as you don't know what you're missing until, if you haven't tried chocolate cake, you might not know how good it is. But the point is, getting that word out there. So to more directly answer that question, any activity of a community involves, multiple departments, multiple research efforts, and and there's permitting and what's right for each respective community. And so one of the key players that's often missing at the table are your telecom providers, your electricity providers, because they're private and they don't answer to the town necessarily. They might respond to an email if the local leadership is upset, but they answer to the investor-owned model. They answer to investors, and so here we're like you said, in the same community, same building, same everything, so we can more directly shape what's best for the community. And you see that with respect to partnerships in a variety of ways, whether it's hanging banners or an Arbor Day model to the efficiency of the business function. I mean, you look at, and it's harder to quantify, and that's one of the, I guess, shortcomings of public power is given its efficiency. We don't have the same, while we're actually lucky here in Shrewsbury because we have a couple of folks that are dedicated to communications, many, if not actually most, do not. Mm-hmm. So we're able to make a simple pamphlet that says, hey, look at the value we're bringing, or economic development opportunity. It's a point of pride when we can say, hey, come build here in Shrewsbury because our not only reliability ratings are second to none, but look at how much your business could save by paying lower rates.
Yeah.
And so often it's hard to believe because you're like, wait, we're going to save a substantial amount of money and our service is going to be twice as good? Like, where do you get that?
Right. Yeah, so let's talk about the rates for just a second, Chris. So Selco rates are, beyond competitive, head and shoulders above competitive levels with the investor-owned utilities, and we're very competitive within the municipal marketplace if you're just looking at municipal light departments. So maybe you could talk about that. So it certainly is a huge economic development incentive and tool that we try to use as much as possible, but what do those rates look like on a comparative basis to the investor-owned?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting question to ask, especially in the last 6 months. We've been in a time of unprecedented rate turbulence and energy costs. But speaking more generally, we have found Shrewsbury's rates tend to be close to half of nearby private utilities, on the order of, say, 40%.
Okay.
For instance, one calculation, we use about 750 kilowatt hours per month as an average user in Shrewsbury. That varies. I think the statewide average, they might use 600, but it's close.
Okay.
And so one of the statistics we toss out there is if you live in Shrewsbury and say you're even on the border of town, your neighbor right down the street, say, might live in Worcester, you're every year going to save $1,000 over your neighbor. And we try and quantify that. Okay, well, 1,000 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's also, think about that. Think about how that could translate to a car payment, to a mortgage payment, to college savings plans, anything that, you could contribute that also, accrues interest over time. So that's 1 year.
Right.
So we've done, say you live in town for 10 or, plan ahead. That's a significant jump, not to mention that anyone should be warned if they're looking to move out of town.
Right.
That could be a hidden cost that they might not plan for.
Right. Yeah, and when you couple that with the town's relatively low tax rate,
Yes.
The value that is provided to residents through this, really internalized approach that has been the Shrewsbury way for so long really provides beyond great value for residents. And Chris, you've begun to chart a path forward for Selco and your business units that I feel will keep us strongly at the forefront of things associated with utility consumption and power consumption. And then, of course, the backbone of pretty much everything that we do in our lives these days, which is internet. So I'd like to spend the last part of our conversation here talking about the 2032 initiative for net carbon neutrality, and then
Sure.
the fiber to the home project that you all are working on. So let's start with the impact of climate change and thinking that you mentioned before with electrification and it being a way to provide clean power to things that we do in our day-to-day lives. And Selco has set out a goal of 2032 to be carbon neutral in your sourcing, I believe, and the energy supply that you provide. So that gives me great reliance as the town manager, knowing what we can do as the municipality to be green in how we conduct business. But where does 2032 come from, and what are the major aspects of that initiative that you're undertaking, even as we sit here today, about 10 years in advance of that date?
Sure, great question. I think I just want to tie it back to one of your previous questions or statements, which this is, I think, a great example of the cooperative and coordinated effort between the public power model and, I guess, furtherance of the community, being the majority. If you look at the study of climate-related impact, you're going to see transportation and home heating and building-related stuff that are primary contributors. Those are things directly outside of our jurisdiction. However, in order for those sectors to be appropriately transitioned to a less, a non-emitting, or make that progress, to be less emitting, the underpinnings of that have to be clean. And there's where our power portfolio comes into play. So if we can be ahead of the curve and secure non-emitting components in power supply, then the second piece of that is then we can then support the other community efforts to say, hey, build codes or, different transportation options can then, say, okay, well, hey, the energy you're using to fuel your vehicle or heat your home is sourced through, wind, solar, hydro, you name it. When you transition, we can now make marked improvements over those metrics. And that's where that key comes into play, because just to draw the contrast is if you don't have the utility on the energy side on board, you're just and sometimes pushing rope, because you have to have both coordinated in order to make those emission numbers come down. So we're doing that. We're doing that through, to your point, anything we secure through our general power supply contract gets applied to anyone who's connected to our system. And so we're actively seeking new contracts that meet that criteria. And at the same time, actually, I should put the plug in there too. The other component to that is we do, similar to the appliances, we push electrification, but at the same time, we're doing that through rebates and incentives.
Okay.
We might not be able to say, hey, you should go buy a certain vehicle, but we certainly can say, hey, if you're going to make that choice, here's an incentive to say it's worth your while, and this is why it's a win-win situation. So we have several programs all listed on the website, and we try and update those on a regular basis to see what is the most effective, what has the most impact to emissions reductions, and what stretches the dollar the best way possible.
Great. So I know Selco and various aspects of the town have been exploring adding solar panels to town buildings,
Yes.
and we're looking to make some adjustments at the annual town meeting in May to allow battery storage to be a little bit easier in certain areas of the community. So there's a lot of, back and forth, give and take, and partnership that are happening in those areas as well. So, and of course, the electrification of our own fleet is enabled by the chargers that Selco is installing and plans to install throughout the community, and so that infrastructure is critical to making things happen. So we'll leave the power side of things and flop over to internet. Selco has a fiber to the home or fiber to
Yes.
the endpoint entity that's going on in the community. What's the latest on that project, and how's it going?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. So, never a dull moment at Selco. On the cable side of things, we're going through what I would consider to be an industry-wide revolution, perhaps. But the backbone of that one is fiber internet. So that right now, dating back to the 80s, we have a coaxial-based system that has served us well, and now we're about halfway through replacing all of that infrastructure with fiber optic cable. Fiber optic cable will then enable us to make all of the technological advancements that today's devices and entertainment and news all leverage. So everything, if you may have heard, for those listening in, anything cloud-based. So really, the fiber optic cable allows, not to use the term, but future-proofing of, the exchange of data. And so really, that's the foundation of everything. And so with the deployment of the fiber optic cable, we can then enhance our broadband offering, and then that broadband offering is the basis for phone. It's basis for obviously internet. It's the basis for your new cloud TV option, Selco Stream, which we've started deploying. We're looking to really ramp up the transition to Selco Stream in the second half of this year, obviously moving forward as well.
Great. It's awesome. So sounds like you're making a ton of progress in that area as well, and those are two really forward-looking initiatives that you've taken on since you've come to Shrewsbury that's really leading us into the future. I mean, I think I could probably sit here and have this conversation with you for hours on end, but maybe we can have you back at some point in time and dig a little bit deeper into the various technical components of Selco and public power and the other things that you do for the town. But I guess at this point we've come to the end of another great conversation here on the Town Manager Download. I just want to remind our listeners that if you have any comments or questions, you can reach us at tmdownload@shrewsburyma.gov. So I'd like to take the opportunity to again thank Christopher Roy, Selco General Manager, for being on with us today. I'm Kevin Mizikar, and on behalf of Taylor Galusha, thank you for listening.